Hello, I'm Sora Luxon, and this is Magic Lesson 39, Intro to Planetary Magick. But first, a heartfelt thank you to everyone. Every day I receive such lovely comments and messages, both through the Facebook LuxOccult page and also through the online store. I get a bunch of direct messages there, and I really just want everyone who takes the time to reach out with some seemingly simple, but usually overwhelmingly gracious sentence or quick thank you or lovely review on something they've received. Or sometimes the stories I get from people on how being introduced to magic is already changing their lives in such wonderful ways. I really want all of you to know that I'm thankful for that I see you. It's my favorite part of every day. I read every single message and I couldn't feel more blessed for your kindness towards me or more appreciative of it and you. Each time there's so much as a chime, because, like the notification chimes you get from cell phones or iPads, every time there's a chime from someone even favoriting something in the shop, which can happen up to 50 times a day before my notification signal will give up on telling me that it's happening, I respond out loud with a thank you, friend. Every single time there'll be a ding, and then I say thank you, friend, which if you're beginning to understand high magics, which hopefully you are a little bit by now, that is a form of esoteric incantation that acknowledges, strengthens, and then returns that now shared energy back to its originator. So something gets favorited in the shop, I say out loud, thank you, friend, that energy is returned. It's important that everyone know this, because if you see someone who's constantly saying that or something like that, right? Like there's a ding from their cell phone every 5 minutes and they go, thank you, friend, when there's a ding. Thank you, friend. Every time that's going on, that's me. And no, I'm not weird. I'm just returning the flow to my fellow magic users. It's a nifty habit to have if you're looking to form new habits, possibly to replace ones you no longer want, much like the early neophyte training of removing egoic self-identification from speaking to others out loud, such as choosing and then forming the habit of removing the word I from your daily speech, which a lot of people struggle with for up to 6 months at a time just to get the knack of that, right? The habit of thanking others, much like that. Saying thank you out loud, whether or not someone's in a room to hear it, when they're doing something you're thankful for, it forms and reinforces psychologically a moment of actual genuine awareness and appreciation of the being of another, of their very existence, and of that effect and action it's taking out towards you. And it just tends to put you in this constant good and optimistic mood all day, which is a nice side effect, on top of actually being a conduit of high magical energy to draw from and replenish with, because it also is an aggregate Luke's energy source. All right, now that I've said that, so that you know that that's going on, every time there's a comment, a message, a story, a chime from a favorite, a nice review, thank you, friend, is being said out loud somewhere by me, whether or not you can hear it. So back to Planetary Magick, or to begin with Planetary Magick, rather. There's a good chance you've already looked into some of this for yourself, or passively have some knowledge of planetary magical symbols and systems. That's going to include things like planets' god names, right? Most people think of Mars as a god and a planet, so there's that passive information already there. The planetary symbols, as still used in science today. So if you have any training in that, you're going to know what the planetary symbols are. The sun is a circle with a dot inside of it, right? The basics of the zodiac and some of the astrology, such as probably at least the signs of the horoscope to a greater or lesser degree. If you haven't learned anything about any of that yet, or haven't read a book or two on anything to do with it, You can try to follow along with this video, but to really practice planetary magics well, if that's what you want to do, you'll need, like everything else in magic really, to ask some questions for yourself and then do the research necessary to answer them for yourself in your own way so that you can begin to gain an actual background and experience in the basics. The very first thing you'll need to have some comprehension of is basic astrology. Astrology includes the signs, which, as I've said, you likely already know to some degree more or less, the houses those signs are residing in, and the planets, or the house, so you have the signs, the houses, and the planets. I'm trying not to make this too confusing. The planets are what rule the signs within the houses. That is, the planets are where the energy, the forces that influence the swing of the pendulum, the power. The planets are the power behind all of that corresponding interpretation of effects. So now you know why it's important to start getting a grasp on using planetary magic, which is why I'm introducing it today. The planets rule you until you decide to learn how to correctly rule them, to move with them at the right time and place with the right action, instead of against them or trying to move against them. And also to step back at the right moment when that is called for. Everything has a rhythm. Remember Hermetics? Everything has a tide, an ebb and a flow, a waxing and a waning. Everything comes in and returns back out. You have an in-breath and an out-breath, a time to grow, a time to decay, a time to build, a time to release. The planets are no different. And they rule those swings of the pendulum forces that you want to be riding up and down at the right moment, harmonically and usefully, rather than fighting against those forces. You want to be able to ride the wave, time it correctly to gently carry you up to its greatest heights, and then back down gently to coalesce and then reemerge and build again, rather than fighting that same wave, swimming against that tide, or being dragged this way and that by currents that you can't control, struggling maybe just to breathe, to keep your head above water. In order to avoid that, you need to know and understand and then take rulership of the planets. There are 7 planets acknowledged traditionally in most forms of astrology. You have the Sun, Mercury, Venus, the Moon, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. If you've begun working with the tarot, you've likely already begun to pick up a great deal about what the characteristics of these planets are and how they function. In more modern forms of astrology, there are 10 planets rather than only the original or origin 7. And there's also a hidden planet. There's an occulted planet, but I'm not going to discuss that today because we now generally include Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto along with the original 7 in modern astrology. As an Enochian occultist, my background relies on the traditional form with only 7 planets, so that's what I'll be focusing on moving forward. But there is a wonderful amount of information on more modern interpretations that you can go find if you are interested in doing so. Both systems, traditional, historic, right, or modern, both have their uses and their assets. And I don't personally consider one to be better or worse than another. I simply choose the traditional way because it's the one I use, it's the one I'm most experienced in, because in my personal experience, the 3 outermost planets, the newer ones, they are so slow in their aspect relational. That is, they're so far away and their powers move so slowly, like molasses, that the impact they have on an individual person is it can't really be perceived, or it's usually only perceivable over a very, very long amount of time. the rise and fall of hundreds of years, for instance, or generations within a family or a culture, which, although intriguing, isn't something that impacts most people in their daily life. Or to put it another way, it impacts people every single day in their daily life so fully and completely, and then also preceding their life and for generations following after their life, that they can't themselves perceive it very easily or need to know that it's there anyway. It's sort of like an ant. Let's say there's an ant in North America. That ant in North America isn't needing to know that the climate of the entire planet is shifting. It is, and that'll have an effect on that ant every single day of its life, but it's an imperceivable effect to that ant during its own lifespan. And it's going to have an effect generation into the future, right? Generations of ants to come will also be affected by that very slow progressional change, this much bigger system that's in play. But to that one little ant during its tiny little, maybe, let's say it only lives 7 days lifespan. I don't know how long ants live. It's just a example, just a metaphor. It doesn't know anything about that, right? It doesn't know that the global planetary climate is changing. And it would be very difficult to explain, even if you could, right? That would be difficult for that ant to interpret and function with. Far more useful to that one little ant during those 7 days is to warn it maybe that the winter it doesn't know its hive needs is coming, and it needs to store food for that winter, whether or not it's going to be around to see it. Or if it wants the others like it to survive, right? Or that an anteater, maybe within that 7-day lifespan, is coming down the path so that it can avoid that anteater by choosing to stay indoors that day. That is far more useful to that ant. And that's what the 7 traditional planets give, a much faster and influential force progression that we can become aware of and then negotiate in useful ways. So the 3 exterior planets, I tend to not pay all that much attention to them. That doesn't mean you don't have to. Again, you can if you want. So that's the planets. On to the signs, right? The signs in astrology for the high ceremonial magician are the traits of those forces that the planets manifest themselves through. The features or characteristics that the power of the planet conveys itself by. Almost like a stained glass window, where each of the signs is a pane of glass. And the light in this example would be the raw, naked power of the planet behind that glass, on the other side of that glass. And then it filters through those different pieces of stained glass, those different signs, in different ways. Some planets like to be in certain signs and do very well in them. Planets in exaltation do extremely well wherever they happen to be. But some planets don't do as well in different signs, or they behave in a different way. A kernel of popcorn is a kernel of corn, and it will remain a kernel if it's in a cool, dry place, if it's in that condition, in that sign. But if you put that same kernel of popcorn into hot, wet oil, now it's something else entirely. It's still actually the same kernel of corn. It's just in different states, dependent on different conditions. That is like the planets in different signs. The force of any given planet behaves differently dependent on the condition of the sign it's in or the lens it's filtered through. Insert any metaphor here, you get the idea. Every sign is ruled over by a specific planet, and each sign also carries an elemental correspondence, which, again, if you've been working with and meditating on the tarot, listening along, maybe as I'm hinting at things here and there as I make those videos, you've probably already begun to pick up passively on what some of those correspondences are. This might go without saying, but the elements are air, fire, water, and earth. To an Enochian magician such as myself, that has a great deal to do with 4 angelic correspondences to those elements. Each element, also along with belonging to a sign, is connected to a specific quality, which is known as fixed, mutable, or cardinal. Those are the 3 qualities. In very early Hermetic Enochian magics, you begin in your studies usually and in your meditations for about a year more or less with Taurus, which is the element of earth and of fixed quality, which in occult circles would be called the fixed earth sign. That is what Taurus is, the fixed earth. So if you're wondering why 12 signs, 4 elements multiplied by 3 qualities, right, equals 12. So 12 signs total. So now that you have a little bit, maybe of an introduction to the planets and kind of what they do and the signs and kind of what they do, next you have the houses. And if you haven't already done a natal chart for yourself yet, or looked in to see just what one is, what it looks like, how it works, now would be a great time to do that, because all of what I'm saying would make a lot more sense to you. The houses relate to the parts of life, the areas of your life, specifically your life, if you're looking at your own natal reading, that the signs have influence over. 12 signs, so there are 12 houses, right? 12 houses that those signs affect. And much like how each sign has a particular ruling planet, the houses themselves, too, have a particular ruling planet. And that can be looked to and worked with magically. This was only supposed to be an intro, and it's a lot of information. It can get overwhelming if you explain too much too quickly. So I'm going to say goodbye for today and pick this up again next time with Intro to Planetary Magick Part 2, I guess I'll have to call it. Get a good solid grasp of what the planets are, what the signs and houses are, what they are and how they work, and you'll be on nice solid ground for moving forward, not only with being able to understand my little YouTube sessions, but also with interpretations and correspondences to use in your own planetary magics. Until next time.